Hi, welcome to Crowdmark Sessions, where we bring educators together to explore innovative teaching practices and redefine learning in today's world. Join us as we dive into discussions that inspire and transform the way we think about education. My name is Michelle Caers, and I'm the host of Crowdmark Sessions podcast. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Crowdmark, which is the leading grading and assessment system for education. Our mission and values of integrity, collaboration, and community are at the core of everything we do at Crowdmark. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing trailblazers from our community of educators to hear their perspectives on learning, technology, and the changing landscape of education. I'm excited, so let's get started. Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions, where we explore the ideas and innovations transforming education today. In this episode, we're diving into 3 interconnected threads, weaving together new ways of thinking about assessment and learning: additive grading, project-based evaluation, and high-structure course design. Our guest has been putting these ideas into practice in inspiring ways, from framing how feedback motivates students, to reimagining major assessments, to designing courses backward from clear, measurable outcomes. But before we begin, let's meet today's guest. Dr. Andrew Miller is a professor of mathematics at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. In his 20 years of teaching, he has taught the full range of undergraduate and mathematics courses, from introductory quantitative literacy classes to calculus to upper-level math electives. His favorite courses to teach are Calculus 3, Analysis, and the General Education Mathematics Seminar for Belmont's Global Honors Program. Andrew's scholarship interests center on undergraduate quantitative literacy education, connections of mathematics to civic life, and lately, the impact of generative AI on undergraduate course design. He's very involved with the Mathematical Association of America, having held leadership positions as a chair of the Special Interest Group on Quantitative Literacy and vice chair for programs for the Southeastern section of MAA. Andrew earned his PhD in mathematics from the University of California at Berkeley. Andrew, we're thrilled to have you with us. Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So we have a lot to talk about today, but just to start things off, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're currently teaching?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been teaching for about 20 years here at Belmont University. And I teach a wide mix of classes, and in particular lately I've been thinking about different ways to design my classes and different ways to do assessment that break out of the traditional mold. I think that a lot of people, when they think of their math classes, think of a class where maybe you have some quizzes, you have some homework that may or may not be graded, but the most important thing you studied for were exams. And so I've been playing around with what would happen, how could you run a course if that wasn't the focus in the math class, and ensure learning and evaluate that. And this semester in particular, I'm teaching one of the honors mathematics seminars that you mentioned in the introduction, and the main mathematical subject for that class is game theory. And the other class I'm teaching is a upper level elective. We call it Introduction to Analysis. Some other places call it advanced calculus, but it's a place where our math majors really dive into the details of writing rigorous proofs about things they may have learned in Calculus 1 or Calculus 2 or Calculus 3.
That sounds excellent. I have so many questions for you about some of these courses. It's really reassuring to hear you say that you're looking at different ways to assess students outside of these really high stakes final exams, because we know today, in today's world, different learners and different people perform better in different situations. Sometimes that high stakes exam, is just, some people just don't perform in that kind of environment. So changing it up, offering different ways to evaluate students' understanding of concepts, I think is really important, and I'll be interested in hearing more about that. One thing I wanted to ask you about before we get into the serious topic of teaching is I think Belmont University is famous for a couple of things.
Hmm.
You mentioned what were those things?
Well, I should start before I dive into that to make sure everybody hears that we are an excellent place to get a science degree for sure. But also historically, we have some nationally known programs in music business and music. And so if you're an American Idol fan, you might see Belmont on screen when they finally air the episodes. The American Idol program was on campus doing American Idol tryouts in one of our theaters and doing some of their outdoor filming. I didn't see any of it, but I know that Lionel Richie and Kelly Clarkson were both on campus. And we've had some previous students go on and do quite well and get very far. I don't think anyone's won yet, but we've had some high advancing contestants both in American Idol and The Voice, as well as all of our students who go on to have fabulous careers in science and computing and technology. We do have a few names that show up on the TV screen too.
Well, I am not a big reality TV watcher, except for American Idol. I love American Idol. So, was this filming just for the upcoming season?
Yeah, that's my understanding is it's for the upcoming season, and I know they like to do some outdoor shots of students gathered and kind of seeing the campus. And then the audition rounds themselves were in one of our theaters. I think we've had them film on campus before when we had, I think it was Mandisa who got quite far. But I think this is the first time they've filmed on campus as part of the audition round.
Very cool. I will be looking for that. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so let's get into the topic at hand. I'm going to start with additive versus subtractive grading. So you've been exploring additive grading, and that is rewarding what students do well instead of penalizing mistakes. What inspired that shift, and how's it changed the way students respond to feedback?
So it's a great question, and I'll say that the journey towards additive grading really started back, well, again, almost 20 years ago. Very shortly after I started teaching at Belmont, I started grading AP calculus exams during the summer, the free response questions. And one of the main goals of the summer reading, they call it reading instead of grading, one of the main goals of the calculus reading is to ensure very, very good consistency because, of course, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of different people evaluating the questions. And their goal is that the student would get the same score no matter who read that paper.
Okay.
And one way they achieve that is by having very, very clear scoring guidelines. And those scoring guidelines go through a model solution for each problem. And they say, here is a way we expect a student to solve it. And at each step along the way, here's where we're going to award the points. And each free response question on the AP Calculus exam has 9 points. Usually each problem has several parts. So a typical question by itself will have, say, 4 points. And maybe it starts with setting up the question, and then you do some simplification, and then you have to plug in some numbers, and then you get the right answer. So a typical scoring guideline would be, 1 point setup, 1 point correct algebraic simplification, 1 point for substituting the numbers you need to substitute, 1 point for getting the right answer. And so the other way that we usually grade student work in math, or that I did for many, many years, was you start with what they have and it's out of 5 points, and you say, oh, arithmetic error minus half point, wrong equation minus 2 points. And so you're starting from a full score and you're going backwards. And so the AP reading got me really, I've done it so long, I'm very, very well familiar with it in that context. I just didn't translate it to the classroom very often. And a colleague of mine who teaches, who does the summer AP reading and also teaches collegiate level math, said when he talks to his students, the way he frames it is, would you rather your grade reflect what you know, or would you rather your grade reflect all the mistakes you made this semester, to sell it to them? And so more recently, when I've had tools that support additive grading a little bit better, like Crowdmark, for example, the way it has a way where you can load in comments associated with points, that really facilitates it, because it is a little bit cumbersome to communicate to students or to use sort of on pencil and paper. It's not too hard, but you can just sort of circle where a student gets a point. But like when I'm using Crowdmark, for example, it's easy. The comment and the point are associated, so I can just place it on the page where that works. And so that's one thing that inspired me to start trying to use it. You also asked about how students react to it, and the interesting thing is the first time I tried it, it was in a differential equations class, and I made a comment in class. I said, hey, just want you to know when you look at your scores, I'm doing additive grading, so you won't see points taken off, you'll see points given. And then I asked them about halfway through the semester, I said, hey, how's it going? What do you think of this? Do other people use it? Are you getting good information? And like, they all kind of stared at me with blank faces. And then one student said, I haven't really noticed. I don't really tell. I can't really tell. So that told me that I was missing part of it. So part of the additive grading is you give them the points for what they learn. But the other part is, which is sort of embarrassing to say that I forgot, is I need to tell them what the guidelines are or find a way to communicate that. So now, this semester in the assessments where I've been using the additive grading, when I return the homework, I also return, it's very AP style. When the AP exam publishes the results for each exam, they will publish the scoring guidelines, which include a model solution, and next to that, how each point is awarded. And so now I've started publishing, when I return the homework, I also give them a sheet that has a very brief model solution and shows where each point is learned. And I hope, I haven't had a chance to find out from them yet or ask them, but I hope that helps them make that connection, so when they're reviewing their work, they can say, oh, this is one way I could have done it right. I got 4 points out of 5. Where did I miss that last point? What step did I miss? And they can go through and see that.
Okay, so you need to also provide the grading rubric or the answer key that points out how they could have approached the response, so that when they see a 4 out of 5, they can see what's missing.
Right. So, if you don't have that, then they can see they got 4 points, but they don't know what that 5th point was unless you provide them the guidelines that indicate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really important. Now, I've heard, assessment has been at universities has been my life really for about 12 years now. And so I talked to a lot of instructors. And one of the things that they used to tell me that was frustrating for them was they would spend hours and hours of grading, and they would give feedback to their students, and then they would have to return those assessments during class time, or they would ask the students to come to their office to pick up their assessment, and that the majority of students never did. They never picked it up. They never collected it, so they never saw the feedback. So they felt a lot of frustration about the fact that they did all that work and it felt like it was for nothing. Do you think that the digital returning of assessments back to students helps solve that problem?
That's a good question, and I think if I were to try to give a fact-based answer, I'd have to do a little more digging and talk to students. So speculating though, of course, the digital returning, one reason I like it, whether I'm using our learning management system or an outside tool, one reason I like it is it's instant, and I don't, it doesn't take that time out of class. Students aren't, so you're talking about returning in class. I used to remember if I was returning a exam, say a major assessment, the tip I was given was don't return it until the last 5 minutes of class, otherwise you won't have any of their attention. So because they want to see how they did it. So the nice thing about the digital returning is they get to look at it when they want to. As far as do they use it? Do they use the feedback? That is also something I've struggled with, is the work I put into comments isn't
Right.
really well spent. And I think I've heard tips before that, try to pick one thing if you're giving feedback, one thing they could improve on. And so when I'm doing more holistic grading, like project reports that are written reports, that's what I remember. Don't comment on everything. Just try to find a big thing. As far as with these scoring guidelines, I'm so new to them that I'm not sure how students are using them. I need to find out. But as far as time goes, which you were kind of alluding to, it is time consuming. That's one thing
Hmm.
as I'm trying it out this semester, it is a fair amount of time to sit down and write a model solution, explain what each point is worth. There's a lot of front-loaded work, and I guess it's still an open question as to whether my students are benefiting from that. I hope they are. I think they are, but I'll have to ask them to find out.
Oh yeah, it'll be great, if you do this for a few cohorts, and
Hmm.
then you can examine the data and compare and contrast and see
Hmm.
if it's really made a difference. That's very cool. Okay. Can you share an example of a moment when additive grading revealed a student's understanding in a way traditional grading might have missed?
Yes, so this just happened recently, and it's not so much about individual students, it's about expectations for a particular class. So I mentioned this
Okay.
honors seminar I'm teaching on game theory, and I've taught this class, for with the same topic for, I don't know, close to 3 years now. So the content I have well laid out. Like I know what I'm going to be doing each day of the semester, and I give them problem sets. One of their major assessments where they're graded both for accuracy and for explanation. So that's kind of a new thing to them to have to explain things. And even though it's an introductory math class, because it's a honors group, so they're students they apply and they're selected in the honors program. Their difference between them and the standard Belmont audience isn't so much like actual background as sort of enthusiasm and willingness to dive in. And so sometimes I'll ask them to try to construct mathematical arguments and maybe even little mini proofs. So there's this one question that I've been working on, and I've assigned for many, many semesters, and it has to do with reasoning through a winning strategy on a particular game called Chomp. And I have assigned this problem probably 5 or 6 times. Each time I assign it, students don't do very well. And I say, okay, well, let me give some tips and hints and write around a little bit. All that tweaking where each time you say, can I ask the question in just the right way that they finally get it and go, oh, okay. So this
Hmm.
semester I assigned it. This is the first time I did additive grading. So I wrote down, like I'd written down the whole problem, like step by step, like as I try to do it line by line, like part A, first step, reasoning step, part B, second reasoning step. I laid out all the grades, and so I could see now we're building up from the bottom. How far do you get? And it was what it was a bloodbath. The average score was probably 2 out of 10, and
Ouch.
yeah, and so I fixed that. Like I didn't punish everybody. I found a way to say, you made a good effort. So I didn't want to punish anybody for that because it's clearly a hard problem. So I worked out with the students. So nobody suffered on that end. But usually where I graded it was I graded it before with the subtractive, where if a student made an effort and they didn't quite get there, I'd be like, well, you really tried. I'll give you 6 or 7.
Hmm.
Whatever. I just give them something because I was like, I could tell they hadn't really gotten very far, but I didn't want to give them like 1 point. Like that just seemed too
Hmm.
harsh. So, but with the additive grading, I was kind of stuck. Like I've decided
Right.
I'm going to give you credit for what learning you demonstrated. What learning can you demonstrate? Not much. And so I know that this pool of students, they're enthusiastic, they're hardworking. So I know when they could only get to 2 points out of 10 on the structure or 3, that's not an issue with their studying. That's an issue like I need to find, if I really think this is important, I
Hmm.
need to find a way to convey that better. That's a issue with the particular question and the way I'm teaching it and how I'm making sure they meet that learning objective. That's not them not trying, because if they were trying and it was reasonable, they'd get a lot higher than 2 out of 10. So that gave me some real insight into the problem that I might have just kept banging my head against the wall with oh, you tried, here's 5 points. if I hadn't been
Right.
stuck to not do that. I had to only give. So it's kind of an interesting reversal. It's for the students, they get credit for what they learned. For me as an instructor, I can only give credit when they've demonstrated learning. And so it really showed, for me, it revealed this big gap in mismatch between what we were doing in class, what I was hoping they could learn, and what they were actually able to do.
Okay, then. So, did that experience influence how you now design or evaluate assessments? Do you take that into consideration?
I mean, I think in general, I can think of a few other cases where I've had assessments and I'm like, okay, how are they going to do this year? Oh, they did really bad. Okay, so what's the issue? What am I doing? Is it something in class? Is it the assessment? And for me, at least, it's really hard to give up on an assessment because I'm a mathematician. I love problems. And so I'll say,
Hmm.
this is a great problem. This it's so fun when you finally figure it out. The logic is so great, the answer's great. Like it's very hard to let something like that go. So
Hmm.
I think for me that it was a new experience to grade that problem additively. So I think it will change the way I evaluate things and assessments. I think it gives more insight into something that may just be too hard. When sometimes it's hard to quantify. Like that's a hard
Hmm.
question to say. Is it the students? Is it the problem? What's the issue when students don't do well? And I think this gives a way to peg that because the individual in the scoring guidelines, the individual items I pegged, I decided, well, that's reasonable. That's what it is to do that problem. So I
Hmm.
know at the outset I've already described what's reasonable in a problem. This is what it means to make progress. And so I think that makes it a little bit easier to identify the problem. It's not what you're asking students to do, it's what students are able to do in context of how you've prepared them. I don't know if that makes sense,
It
but
does. It
yeah.
does. That it turns it into an assessment about how good is this assessment and how good is the teaching leading up to that.
Hmm.
Are the students prepared to answer it? And then that gives you some insight whether to change your teaching, go back and revise,
Right.
revision, review, change your approach. I think that's great. I mean, what do people need when they get out in the world? They need problem solving skills.
Hmm.
And, once you try a problem and you don't get very far, you learn a lot, but then you learn the second time you try it as well.
Hmm.
So that's great. Okay. We kind of already touched on this, but what challenges have you encountered in implementing additive grading, either practically or philosophically, and how have you addressed them?
Well, so some of it is a little bit nuts and bolts. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you want to give students a problem that has like students are used to like 10-point problems. And so you want to give them 10 points, and let's say you can only identify 3 or 4 steps in the problem. Then there's a little bit of work to figure out, how many points per one. Like, if you think about to the AP reading, they have 9 points in every problem. Every individual step is 1 point. That is a little bit too restrictive in my experience when you're trying to design assessments that students can make sense of. Again, as a mathematician, it's kind of funny to me that let's say I had an assignment that was worth 37 points. Students they just lose it. They wouldn't understand. What do you mean it's out of 37, right? Well, the denominator doesn't matter. It's just the percentage you get. Well, I understand. Like it's much easier to see 50 points, and so that is a little bit of nuts and bolts. It's challenging, but really it's mostly the time because there's time to write up because it's something that students are going to receive. Then to produce something, at least, and maybe I'm just having very high expectations for myself, but to write
Mm-hmm.
something that includes a model solution and lays out in a tabular form, here's 1 point for this step, 1 point for this step. There's a lot of front-loaded time on that. And then putting it in this particular case, when you're using something like Crowdmark, a digital grading, putting it into that, like there's some steps along the way for the workflow. And so that's been hard. Now, one reason that's a little more time consuming this semester, it's one of the earlier times I'm doing it. So I hope that if I reuse assessments or slightly modified assessments, that's work I'll already have done. And so it'll be more of a editing and polishing. And so I think those are the two main challenges I found, is sort of the real question of how to map steps to points for each problem, and then just the time it takes to prepare the model solution for the students.
Right. Yes. I would hope it's like an investment for you in your instructional curriculum that you can reuse and improve over time. Have you run this by colleagues, or have you had colleagues involved in this? And what is their view or feedback on this approach?
Well, so one of my colleagues, we've talked about this a little bit, and he asked me a really interesting question. He said, "Okay, so you're developing these rubrics, and you're gonna like say you get 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 point here." And he said, "Are those things you could give students before they turned in the assignment?" And obviously I can't give them the model solution. That would kind of defeat things. But like if you write the guidelines sort of vaguely enough, then that might be a way for them to say, okay, to have a successful completion of this problem, to do this type of problem, I need to do these steps. I need to do this, 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 this. So it gives a little bit more scaffolding so they can see what they need to do. And I guess it even gives them an opportunity to say, hey, I think I've solved the problem, but I do not see where I did the fifth point. Like the fifth point says I'm supposed to do this thing and I didn't do, or I don't see that. Like I must be missing something. And so that's a really intriguing idea that I want to play around with. Again, with this semester, with implementing it with some familiar assessments but new methods. That's not something I have ready in time to give to students, but it's certainly something I want to explore in the future. What if you give them the scoring guidelines without the model solution? So they say, this is the structure of a problem and fill it in. Like I know definitely there are times where you want students to be able to take something and without a lot of guidance, figure out what a complete solution is. It's a metacognitive level you want students to eventually learn. But in an introductory class, maybe it would be totally appropriate to say, here's the steps for the problem. Make sure you do all of those steps. So that's been really interesting. Beyond that, I haven't really talked about it real widely in the department yet, but I think it's something I will share with people more. I don't think this would be, well, one reason I think it could spread to some other colleagues is that I don't think this grading method would be really feasible with the speed grader. We use Canvas, Canvas, but I don't think it would be feasible with the speed grader there because it's very, very difficult to put in comments, like point by point comments in that process. And so we have some other users of Crowdmark here in our department, and I think they would be willing to try that out because, of course, in Crowdmark, you can associate a point with a comment, and so I can load those scoring guidelines in as 1 point for this reason, 1 point for this reason, and when I go to grade, it's just sort of dropping them on the page, each place where I see each point. I know that wobbled a little bit sideways. I was just pointing that out because I think that's one reason why it might be able to be adopted for our students, right, for our colleagues who are doing the digital grading. Of course, if it's pen and paper, you can just write the number 1, 1, 1 where they are. But again, it's kind of nice to know why the ones are there, I think, for the feedback part of assessment. And that would be really time consuming with pen and paper.
One of the purposes of assessment that I think sometimes gets missed is, when it's a pursuit of grades, that assessment is a learning tool. It's meant to be a learning tool. It's not just about how much did this student memorize or how much does the student know, particularly like you mentioned in your introductory course. So using assessment as a learning tool and then teaching the different elements of how to approach the problem and like mapping that out for the first time around, I think that would be super effective for the students learning. And then when it comes to maybe an assessment that's further along in the course, that really prescriptive approach to problem solving is not given, but
Right.
they've had the training to understand how to go about that process. I think that happens a lot in engineering.
Yes.
And it may not, be taught in other disciplines where it would be equally effective and helpful for people.
Yeah, like just your comments reminding me of a colleague who does sort of graduated assessments like that, where like maybe there's 3 type of one assessment throughout the semester, and the first one has lots and lots of scaffolding, and the second one has a little bit less, and the third one has even less. So even if it's like the same, like for me, problem sets, maybe they're all problem sets and they're all about the same difficulty, but you start to pull away some of the struts. And I think in mathematics, one reason that I think that would be important is another lesson that I want students to learn is that there's not always one way to approach a problem. So even though I have scoring guidelines and what we would call a model solution, if somebody takes a different route that's completely correct mathematics, of course they're going to get full credit. And so that is one danger of the scaffolding, is they may learn, okay, if it's this kind of problem, I have to do this, this, this. That's the only way to approach it.
Right.
So that's one thing I think, that pulling those scaffolds away also helps to give them some creativity and freedom.
Right. Mathematics is much more creative than people usually perceive it to be.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, let's switch gears here. Go on to one of our other topics, which is projects as major assessments. You've been replacing traditional exams with project-based assessments in your courses. What kinds of projects have worked best for demonstrating deep learning?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting that we just talked about creativity, because when I was thinking about the different projects I've assigned, one of the things that makes a good project is one that allows the students to have some creativity, and that could come out a few ways. So first of all, for some practical reasons and also to help them be able to achieve more, a lot of times I'll assign projects in teams. And one component of those, and maybe to back up a little bit so people know what I mean by projects. So these are usually things where they are often an applied or in-depth problem in a class, but it's sort of focused. So there's a single general topic, even if there are multiple parts. And the students will usually have about a week or two, and the result, what they turn in, is a written report. Sometimes it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. Sometimes I ask them to write more narratively, but important thing is they use, full sentence communication, explaining their work, good notation, and so that's the final output. And a simple example of one that I give in Calculus 2 is kind of a made-up problem where I imagine you have there's a rover on Mars, and they've discovered this amazing, maybe it's a hieroglyphic on a rock wall, and they want to take the best picture of it, and the camera on the rover has a certain angular, the picture is bigger in the photo that the rover takes, the wider the angle is you make. And so, and the rover's looking up at it, so if it's right against the wall, you can't really see much of it, but if it goes far, far away, you can't see much of it. So as a calculus problem, how close should the rover be so that the angle that the wall face takes up is the biggest? Now, obviously, that's a bit of a silly problem. NASA is never going to go through that calculation. Like, they could just move the rover around and get it.
Okay.
But there's a story. And so the creativity, so getting back to what makes a good project, first of all, I try to have it be something that catches their minds, their imaginations. So that's what, NASA with a rover on Mars. If it can be applied or very realistic, like actually something people would do, I aim for that. And I also aim for this creative element. And sometimes I try to get students make a judgment what what would you tell somebody who asked about this? Like there's a project I use in differential equations that models fish harvesting. And at the end I say, imagine you're presenting a harvesting recommendation to the local town council that's trying to pass a harvesting regulation. What would you tell them about how much harvesting they should allow and why? And what are the dangers of if they allow too much harvesting? And the model shows that if you harvest too much, the whole population can collapse. But if you harvest a small enough amount, it can be a sustainable population. And so that sort of judgment or creativity, I think students really enjoy it. And sometimes students also, when I put it in a frame like that, they like to run with the imagination. Like maybe they'll format the report as a report to NASA, right? From, so and so to NASA, and they'll put little NASA logos on their report and have fun with it. Most students will just kind of write it in complete sentences, but every once in a while, students like to pick it up and run. So I think I've hit on most of the things that makes that hit, right? Of course, it's also got to include some of the learning objectives that you're aiming for, but that's the sort of thing you try to embed with it. So usually when I'm brainstorming a project, it can go both ways. It can go top down or bottom up. Either, ooh, here's an interesting situation that I know we can use this mathematics to do. How can I build learning objectives in? Sometimes it'll be, boy, I really want them to work on maximization. What's a problem where we could use that's semi-realistic?
Those sound really interesting and engaging. I recall when I was studying mathematics in university, it certainly wasn't my major. It was a mandatory course. It always seemed so abstract. And I always felt like I was writing numbers and I never really, and figures, and I didn't really know why or, what the outcome of this equation or finding the function of something. Like, what meaning did that have for me? And had it been posed to me in a different way about, taking a picture of something on Mars and then how to fit the math to make it work, to me, that would have been a lot more engaging. And I think I would have understood it better, understood the concepts better than just numbers on a page.
It's more fun to read too, as a grader. Like, time consuming, yes, but also more interesting when you have a chance to read student reports about how they would approach something.
Especially when they take that extra effort
Yes.
to make it kind of cool for you to
Yes.
look at, like a actual report.
Yeah. And some
Yeah.
students, they really like to show their personalities as
Yes.
well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. So how do students engage differently? Like, this is a great segue. Like, how do
Yeah.
students engage differently with a project than with an exam? And more importantly, have you noticed shifts in motivation, creativity, or collaboration?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I build collaboration into most of the projects. I will say that this is, properly managing collaboration, so every student is learning and every student is pulling their own weight. That is a big problem I will not pretend to have solved, but I try to make it so that students are going to gain something from working with each other. That's one of the reasons I put some of the judgments, like make a decision, make a recommendation in. I think we've already talked a little bit about creativity. As far as how it affects students compared to a traditional exam, it's lower stress or maybe a different kind of stress in that students, I've sort of heard kind of through the grapevine that when students learn that this is something I do, they're attracted to it for some of the classes. They say, oh, I don't have to take a test. Now, in the back of my mind, something I haven't resolved yet is, I try to make sure that the learning they do through the projects is at least as good as the learning they might do if they had to study for an individual exam. And again, I'm not sure that's a problem I've totally solved, because when you're having a lot of collaborative work, there's a question of who learns what. But I do hear, like on student evaluations, it's sort of pretty regular that the students will mention that I really liked the project. Not every student, but several students usually will say, I really loved the projects. They were really interesting. They showed me that the math, this is really something I can use, not just solving equations. So from students for sure, I think it's been a pretty generally a universal positive response. I'm very hard pressed to think of any time where a student has come right out and said, I hated the projects. I wish I could have just taken a test. Now, there probably is that student out there. I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm sure.
But I think the majority, at least, are finding them interesting. And even in some classes where I teach, occasionally students who take multiple classes with me will kind of come and say, oh, what's the next project? What projects are you working out for us? And I'm like, oh, well, now I have expectations to meet.
Uh-oh.
but it's nice, right? They've learned that, and I think it's good to have a variety of different types of instruction in a department, but they've learned if I take a class with Dr. Miller, this is the kind of experience I have. I know that I like it. I know that there's some positives, and go from there.
Are you familiar with the concept or the exam of two-stage exams?
Yes. So I think you're
Because
referring
this really
to
reminds me of that in a way.
where one portion is alone and another portion is collaborative in some way.
Yes.
Yes. I think were I to go, and I still think sometimes, but were I to use exams, I would be very tempted to do that sort of thing. Now I guess on that note, I have experimented, like there's I talked about a quantitative literacy course I teach. And one semester I was like, let's see what happens if I put exams back. Like, let's just see how it feels. Do I feel like students are learning more? And at least from how I felt about students preparing for it and taking it like a traditional exam, I did not really feel like it was adding to the learning objectives I had for the students. Now, what about it? Would a collaborative exam add? Probably more. I think if I would be more open to do some sort of two-stage exam in a place like that. But yeah, so it's a good thing to mention. I think that I bring that up to mention that I want to make sure people know I'm not saying exams are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is learning that you can accomplish from preparing for an exam. I think you can learn by taking an exam. I think just the way we know about how brains work. We know that having to recall that information and use it can actually strengthen the learning, strengthen the synapses and the neurons. For me, though, I have decided this is a place where I can also foster learning in a way that I enjoy, that gives students a different experience, and that works for me.
So if you had a colleague who said, my students are raving about your courses, and I've always done it a traditional way. I rely on exams. What advice would you give them if they wanted to start offering project-based assessments?
Well, I think when you're trying to make a big teaching change or try something new, I'm not good at this, but the general advice is start small. So I would probably say, okay, well, think about maybe pick maybe one exam, or pick one topic that you really hope students would do better on or learn more on. And why don't you try to write some sort of, maybe you start with a class activity. Maybe it's something where they would complete in class and write up real briefly outside of class. Another small way to start might be, what if on an exam, just brainstorming here, what if you wrote a short take-home problem that is like a applied word problem, and you could trust them to work on their own, or even they don't have to work on their own as long as they don't copy from their neighbors, and say, here, I want you to work on this applied problem and bring it to the exam. So then it's a very short applied problem to show, so they can see, again, those applications. I think that if the person decided, exams just aren't working at all, then I might talk with them more. Okay, well, what if we pull those out and replace them with projects? What would that look like? Just know that Hopefully you have a colleague who's written projects or you have projects. The other thing is textbook. A lot of textbooks have projects. So you could start with your textbook. Is there something in the book that you could look at and say, hey, that would be great. Let me just have my students do that instead of an exam.
That's really great advice. I
Yeah.
think, for anyone listening to the podcast, they could take any one of those and just try it out and see how it goes. So I think that's great advice. And I'm going to encourage everyone, get out there, do things different, try it differently, see if you have the same experience as Dr. Miller and you start enjoying grading even more, or start enjoying grading as opposed to seeing it as a chore. Okay, so again, we're going to switch gears now and look at the third aspect that we talked about earlier in the intro, which is backwards design in high structure courses. So this is a new concept to me. You've used backwards design and Justin Schaefer's high structure course design to build an upper level elective. How did that, first of all, tell us what that approach is, and then how did that approach reshape your planning and priorities?
I guess to a brief lead up, I was teaching this fall the intro to analysis class I mentioned. I had literally not taught that course since I think 2005. We've had lots of other people interested in it. So I knew I've grown a lot as a teacher and as a person since then. So this wasn't the sort of thing where I was planning on pulling out what I did then and just redoing it. So I was like, what do I want to do with this class? And it is traditionally a class that students find very challenging because there's a particular type of formal mathematical language that is used a lot in this advanced calculus that students find hard to grasp and hard to start using. And they're starting to do some new mathematical skills like finding counterexamples, evaluating, is this statement true or false? Like usually, we say, this is true, explain to me why. But then they start having to read things and evaluate. Is this argument I've written a correct argument? And I evaluate it on my own. So that gave me the motivation to see what I could do. And then another thing I've been trying for many years that's worked pretty well is I've been asking students in higher level courses or even some intro courses to read the book beforehand. Now, I know a lot of professors say that, and we also know a lot of students don't do that unless they have some incentive. So I've been giving these very short reading quizzes that they don't take in class, they take up before class, and to kind of get them to read it, engage with it, and have questions. Okay, so those are some of the ingredients leading in. And then I heard on the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, Justin Schaefer was talking about his approach with high structured learning, and I said, hey, that sounds a lot like my reading quizzes on steroids.
Okay.
And so the approach that he takes in his classes and he's written about, and again, all of this is Justin Schaefer. This is me using what he did, not me developing anything new.
Okay.
But he also encourages people to read the book, and so he writes reading guides, which are they're more involved than reading quizzes. They'll have okay, after you read this page, there'll be a question that they can answer from that page. Like a good example from my intro analysis is there's a proof of some key result, and I could say, okay, what is the main idea of that proof? Write it down here. Or, oh, here's a definition we really need to know. What is the definition of uniform continuity, for example? Write it down right here. And so it's something where they actually take notes as they read. Now, another thing that Justin includes is learning objectives. So that's where the backward design comes into play, where you sit down, and I've always heard people talk about this, but I've never had the courage or the time to do it because it just sounds like so much work. Traditionally, I have to teach a class. Okay, I have to teach analysis. Well, what book do I want to use? Okay, well, what's the order of the table of contents? All right, we're set. We'll start at page 1. We'll get as far as we can go. There's our class. Do they have homework problems in the book? Great, we'll just use those. And this kind of goes backwards, and it says, okay, what do you want students to be able to do at the end of the class? So you try to define overall learning objectives for the class. Now, what sort of assessments would that lead to? Now that you have the assessments, Now look at each section. What do you want them to learn from this section? What are the learning objectives for this unit? Okay, so what in-class activities will support that learning? And so I think in addition to like writing reading guides for just about every section of the book, one of the big things that this created is a new type of assignment. So, and I call them mathematical reasoning challenges. They're a little bit different than homework because the problems, students aren't doing very many homework problems from the book, but they're not really quite a project. It's more like a selection of small tasks that are focused on the type of mathematical reasoning you want to do. Like some of them I'll say, here's a proof, it's not correct. Why is it not correct? What is missing? And how would you fix it? Or I'll say, here's 5 statements. Tell me if it's true or false. If it's false, give a counterexample. And if it's true, just give a short, you don't have to give a full proof, just a short explanation of why it's true.
When did you start using this approach to, like, when did you hear this podcast? When did you start using this?
The podcast was within the last year, and it was tied to a book that was coming out. So it was really because the book he wrote came out this summer, and I said, why the heck not? I'll dive in and try it. And
So because the reason why I ask is I'm wondering if there were any surprise outcomes of, students' improvement or anything like by implementing this change. Did you meet what you were hoping to?
So far, yeah, I think so. I mean, we're still in the middle of the semester. We're getting close to the end. They have a sort of a big project. So we haven't quite done part of the class. Part of the objectives was to be able to investigate a mathematical topic on your own and present it to others. So that's their final project. So that's still an open question. I will say that students have been doing quite well on the assessments that I've been giving them, these mathematical reasoning challenges, a couple of projects. You asked about surprises. Here's 2 surprises that came out. The first is, I will admit, I've always been a little, I don't think suspicious is the right word, but everyone who says, skeptical, that's much better. Thank you. Thank you for filling in. I've always been a little skeptical about learning objectives. I was like, I mean, why do you need learning objectives? You just learn the stuff. And I know that's kind of a weird. I think I'll explain my stance in a bit. I've thought about it, and I think I know why I had that. But very early in the class, when I asked students, "Hey, I've been doing these reading guides. They take me some time. I'd like to know, are they helpful?" And on the mid-semester feedback I got from them, it was the most unanimous, ask an open question, what's helping you learn. I've never gotten such a high percentage of students pick one item, and it was the reading guide. So the students are really finding them useful. But what was surprising is one of the first comments I got is a student said, it's really helpful to see the learning objectives for each section because now I know when I'm reading what I'm trying to get out of it. And I think the reason I've been so skeptical is that as a scholar and someone who's been a scholar and who, let's be honest, people who become professors are not normal learners. It has been a very long time since I've known how to do that in my own reading. I've been able to pay attention to reading and ask and monitor what is this section about? What is the important idea? What do I think I should take from reading it? And that, I think I just underestimated how big of a skill that is, especially for students, even if they're juniors and seniors, especially for college students. That sort of close reading is a big deal. So that was surprise number 1. The students really actually like having learning objectives. Surprise number 2, I came to crunch time recently in my class. This happens sometimes when I'm developing a new class. I have a ideal schedule, and then the semester rolls along and things don't go quite perfect, so some dates slip a little bit, and I got to a point where it was about time to assign a new project to the students. but also about time to assign a new mathematical reasoning challenge. And I was like, I'm just going to kill him if I do both. I'm going to kill me too. It'd be too much grading. And so, based on some conversations with the students, I had one particularly vocal student that said, the mathematical reasoning challenges are my favorite part of this class. They are so cool. And so, I kind of asked myself, I said, do I really need both? And I decided I don't. So, when I came to crunch time and I had to decide between a project that, I kind of knew what I was going to assign, I was looking forward to it for the project. And we've been talking about how much I've been doing that, and this new type of assignment, the new type won. And I don't think that would have happened unless I had been thinking about what kind of assessments would hit at all the skills, because the projects didn't hit at all the skills I'd identified for the class. So I needed something else to get there. And it turned out to be something that, I guess, when push came to shove, it beat out the project. So that was surprise number 2.
So it sounds to me like your creativity and your approach to curriculum and teaching is also supporting student creativity in how they learn and find solutions. So that, to me, that sounds like a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what keeps things interesting. It's just, I can't always do the same thing semester after semester.
No.
Again, that's dangerous. I'll admit, I have some classes where I do try to do mostly the same thing just for my own sanity. But it's nice to have new things. I think writing projects is an outlet for my creativity too, as you bring that up.
Right, right. Okay, so then looking at the bigger picture, looking across these 3 approaches to assessment: additive grading, project-based assessment, and backwards design. Do you see a common thread in what makes learning more meaningful or equitable for students today?
I think that it's the common thread there is really focused on student learning as opposed to content delivery, which maybe if that makes sense. So, and I think in each of these cases, instead of saying, okay, what's the best way I can explain Rolle's theorem? Or what's the best way I can do an example of how to solve a linear differential equation? Like, what's the best delivery method? I think when you talk about the reading guides and the backwards design and the scoring guidelines with the additive grading and the projects, I think what really drives me with that is not what's the best way I can explain something, but what's the best way I can help students learn something. So I think that's the biggest common thread I can find there.
Mm-hmm. And, if only all educators thought that way, I think we'd have better learners out there.
Well, I'm fortunate to work at a place where I think that's how most of us think.
That's great.
There's just
Really
a lot
good
of
to hear.
inertia in how we learn how to teach.
Yes, absolutely. Change is probably the biggest blocker to innovation and change management, not change itself, change management. I'm listening to you and your different approaches, and I didn't want to sidetrack us by asking this halfway through, but AI, I don't think we can have a discussion today without really talking about how AI comes into education and particularly assessment. It's making assessment more challenging, and we have a unique position at Crowdmark because we serve so many universities all over the world. We get to see trends very early on in assessment types and how people are approaching assessment. And what we've seen is a big shift back to paper-based assessment, assessment in a room with no way to tap into generative AI. Are you seeing the same thing? And has, do generative AI considerations come into your lesson planning and assessment planning?
That's a great question. It's a very hard question, and I think we're still collectively in education trying to work out the answer. I will say, as far as a trend, I hope it does not mean a wholesale return to students in rooms in blue books. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason is kind of as we've talked, I've moved away from high stakes in class assessments because for me, I felt like it was a better way to support learning and engage students. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, returning to in class work only would be a step back for me.
Okay.
So I hope that's not the final answer. And I don't really have a lot of alternative answers, except that the way I think about it is not how do we stop students from using generative AI, but I think the question we're going to have to answer as we go forward is either, so on the one hand, how do I convince students that it's in their best interest to do some things on their own? Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
whole point of some things we have you do. And it is just a waste of your time and everybody's time to have AI do it. I'm thinking of the reading quizzes. You know,
Yeah.
it's literally a 2 sentence answer to read the book. And I've had people admit after being challenged that they've used generative AI to do it. And I'm like, it's worth so little of your grade. Like,
Yeah. Give it a try.
yeah. And I don't want to hear what a computer says. I do that so I can hear what you say.
Yeah.
So there's that. And so second, I think the challenge is what are we going to have students do that doesn't really matter if they use AI at some point, right? So what,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think generative AI is going away. I think it's going to be part of a lot of professions as we go forward. I'm not sure if access will be as cheap and free as it is now. I think that's a big question mark because we're
Mm-hmm.
still early in the phase where these companies are trying to grow their user base. And we know that
Yeah, we're kind of in the Napster phase
yes,
of
yeah,
Gen AI.
the Napster or yeah, any of these where it starts out, they're just trying to get people to use it. Um,
Yeah.
but I am worried because every semester I'd like to test assignments by uploading it to ChatGPT, and I'll just take the PDF of my assignment and I'll say, write me an answer key.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say answer key because if I tell ChatGPT to write me solutions for this, it thinks I'm a student and it says, I
Right.
can't do that. That's not ethical. And I'm like, well, good. I'm glad you programmed that in. But all I have to do is say, write me an answer key and it'll give me solutions. So it's very easy to trick. And it gets better every semester. And even the high level thinking tasks in my analysis class, if a student were to turn that work in, it would be correct. I wouldn't know. So that's the big open question in my mind too. Is like I don't know whether my students are plugging it into ChatGPT. My job as an instructor is, at least at this point, is as much as possible to convince them that I really am interested in you in learning. I want you to
Mm-hmm.
want to learn, and so let's just not do that. Let's just agree that I'll set fair standards and fair expectations, and you want to engage in the class and try to meet those on your own.
So that is a great view because for my next question, my final question of our conversation today, and this has been a really, really interesting, fun conversation. I think our listeners will really enjoy. Um, you're a passionate educator and you put a lot of thought and care into how you teach, and that really comes across. And I find that really inspirational. Um, do you have any stories of students who came to you and shared the kind of impact that you've had on their learning and talked to you about the difference you've made for them?
Yeah. So I've built a lot of nice relationships with students in the recent years. Some
Mm-hmm.
heading off to grad school. A few I can think of that were not sure of their abilities and took a little encouragement. Um, One recent story is I had a student come in to talk to me this week because he had signed up for my spring game theory course. I have a special topics class, and it has a prerequisite of a particular introduction to proofs class because we're going to do some advanced mathematical reasoning there in addition to calculations. And I looked at his course schedule and saw he hadn't had that. And so I just sent him an email and said, hey, let's chat about your interest in this class. And so he came in, and it was somebody I'd had in Calculus 2 and recently. And I remembered him from then, but he came in, and he's an economics student, and game theory has a big intersection with economics. A lot of theoretical economics use that. So he mentioned that was an interest, and he had some other math classes. But then he said, like, I just really, really enjoyed Calculus 2, and I have been wanting to have another class with you. In particular, I was just talking to somebody the other day about the radiation project we did in Calculus 2. And it's a particular project where you use a little bit of mathematics to understand a particular physics conundrum about, it's called black body radiation, that the classical model suggests that you should have infinite energy pouring out of everything. And it was a quantum theory that explained why that wasn't true. And so we could mathematically analyze the quantum theory and show that it matches the experimental data better with some simple stuff. And so that was very encouraging to me, because this Calculus 2 class was, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was at least a year ago. And so I don't know how many students remember a specific lesson or a specific assignment in most of their classes. I know for me, there are very few of any of my college classes, a few, but very few, where I can think of a specific assignment that I said, that assignment was meaningful and I remember it and it was cool. And so it was really great to hear that that's something that he remembered enough, and that he was enjoyed it enough that he wanted to have another class. So that was fun. It's nice to hear that directly from a student.
Absolutely. Like, he was looking at the schedule and looking for you to see how he could learn from you in another class. That's excellent. I think what a great endorsement for everything you've just said. It must be working.
I hope so too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you again for joining us for this session, the Crowdmark Sessions, and all your input and ideas and feedback. It's really appreciated. So thank you, Andrew.
It was my pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.
You've been listening to Crowdmark Sessions, where we explore the ideas and innovations shaping the future of education. If today's conversation inspired you, be sure to follow and share it with a colleague. To see how Crowdmark is helping educators unlock potential and transform assessment worldwide, visit crowdmark.com. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, take care.